Answering. My name is Ari Foyer. I'm a software engineer on the Visa Developer Platform, and I wanted to take you into a bit more of a technical deep dive today. Before that, let's see what the answers we collected were. So, Visa Token Service is a great one for IoT that you can tokenize any credit card and for use on a mobile device or any other kind of IoT-enabled device. Visa Direct, also a good peer-to-peer payment solution. And Visa Merchant offers Resource Center, also a great one. So thanks for answering that. For now, I'm going to take you into a deep dive on some sample code that we have on the developer platform for any projects that that you're building. So we got some feedback in from the previous webinars, and some of you guys wanted a more technical twist to the webinars. So today, that's what we're here to do. So let me share my screen. All right. So, all right. Hopefully you guys can see my screen now. So the first thing I want to make sure that everyone is set up with, we're going to do a setup with Node today. So the sample code's all going to be Node.js. So for this demo, I'm using Node version 6 or higher. And from there, this is just the regular developer.visa.com site. I'm going to sign in, and we're going to create an app and dive into the sample code. So let's see. Let's go to a new project, and let's go with CyberSource Payment API. I'm picking this for a specific reason, which we'll go into in a second. So now that we've created our CyberSource project, we can see we've already gone over on previous webinars what all these panels are: your credentials, test data, users, which we have a new feature now in our Sandbox environment where you can invite other users to share in your credentials in your project, which is a nifty new feature. But today I want to talk about sample code. So you'll see here, if we come to the sample code tab over here on your sidebar, that we have a couple different languages supported. As we said today, I'm going to go through with Node. So once you download your sample code, we're going to unzip it. I'll rename it here, webinar. And I'm going to move it into our project file. One second. So let's move it into my webinar folder. And if we come to our IDE over here, let's start going through, let's start with the README. It's always a good place to start when you download a new project. So installation is very easy with Node, Npm Install, and then once we update our configuration file, we'll be able to run npm test and get on a roll. So if I come here to our terminal and navigate over to our folder, first thing we want to do, like we said, is run npm install to set up the project. Make sure you're in the directory. Oh, I'm not sharing this right now. Here we go. Sorry about that, guys. I was in another space. Let me just make sure you guys can see everything before I go on. So all I've done so far is I have navigated to our directory where we downloaded our project. Make sure our package.json is there. So when we run npm install, we will download all the dependencies that we need for this project. While we do that, why don't we, while that's loading up, let's go over my guide that we're going to kind of follow for this. If you come to docs, and then these global docs, we see getting started with Visa Developer. That's an awesome resource for really getting started with any questions you have starting up, whether it's your first time or you're creating a new project. We're going to go over authentication and test connectivity today. So for CyberSource, we use an authentication scheme called XPay token. So that's one of two that we use. So I'll come down here to XPay token. It's basically just a username and password, and it's the simpler of the two authentication schemes. So coming over here, let's see if our dependency is installed. No, it's not a big deal though. While we're waiting on that, so if we come back to our app that we just created, if we come to our credentials, we'll see we have an API key and shared secret. So those are your two credentials that you need to authenticate with this XPay token scheme. So if we come back, still waiting on this. Let me pull in my editor here so you guys can see what I'm doing here too. So this was the README I was referring to before. So we can see Npm Install. Let's go into our into this config folder also and see this configuration file. So here you'll see the configuration file is preloaded conveniently with your API key and shared secret that I just looked at on the portal, right? Same thing here and on the sample code that you just downloaded. So that's nice and easy. It's all preloaded. Those are the only credentials you need, and you don't even have to worry about them. They're preloaded, so that's a nice bonus for the sample code. So let's see how we're doing on the install. Still waiting. I have a pre-installed project as well, so we might as well just jump into that one. So a couple nice things about the sample code. They have your credentials already loaded in, which is one. And the second convenient thing is it's a great starting off point for your project. It has a fully working flow and a client that calls our Sandbox API automatically with very little setup needed. So that's kind of the nice thing to start off with. Even if you have an idea of what you want to do separately, sample code is always a good place to start. So let's go into one of my projects that I already set up. So here I've already installed the dependencies of the project and set up my configuration file with the credentials that for that project. So coming back to the README here, once you've installed the dependencies and set up your configuration.json, it's as simple as running npm test to run the tests that come pre-configured. So if we run npm test, we get an error because I am not on my node version that I asked you guys all to be on. Sorry about that. Alright, so node version 6, like we said at the beginning. Alright, so now that we are using the correct version of node, let's run npm test. So we're using Mocha to run these tests, which if you have worked with Node before, you might be familiar with. So we can see that we have a built-in test here, CyberSource Payments Authorization Test, that passed successfully. So let's see actually what happened behind the scenes, what that test was, and let's break it down a little bit further. So if we come into our test folder, we can see CyberSource Payment Tests.js. Here we have, we're just using the built-in request module. We're loading our configuration file. We're using this Visa API client that we'll go over in a bit. And we're using Chai to run our assertions for our Mocha tests. So we're describing our test. And we're going to instantiate a new Visa API client. We're going to come here. This was a payload that was preloaded with a sample code, so it's just a working payload for this call, and this call is going to be to the authorizations endpoint. So we're going to do a post to this authorizations endpoint in CyberSource, and to see what is the full documentations, you can come to your app, and if you come to your summary, if you go to CyberSource Payments API here, and then API reference is the best way to access this full documentation. So as you can see here, authorize a credit card, and this endpoint is CyberSource Payments v1 authorization. So that's the endpoint that was preloaded. This test was preloaded onto the sample code. And so you can see the full, another example here of the body, headers, etc. But thankfully for us, all of that was preloaded when we came in. So here's our body, and our API key is appended to our URI here. And then we have this Visa API client that we talked about before briefly, and then we're saying do XPay request. Remember, we're using the XPay token authentication scheme here. So if we come into the Visa API client here, you can see what we're doing here. So this is the main service that we're using to actually make the call. So if we come down to XPay request, we see that the function takes in a base URI, resource path, query parameters, the body of the request, the method type, headers if there are any, and a callback. So what we're doing is we're logging the request, which we saw from the terminal, setting our headers, and from there we are using the request, or we're passing in the callback as we described here for when the request comes back. So that's just a quick run through of an XPay token flow. So coming back to our terminal, you guys can see we're logging the test and the body here, and then we see the response code. We came back with a 201 created, which is awesome, and also we can capture our response body here. So we got back a transaction ID, our status, etc. And again, you can see the full list of response parameters, response attributes here for a full description of what's actually coming back as well, right? So documentation is your best friend when you're writing and executing these tests. So let's double check and see if our original project. All right, so our original project was installed. So we're going to come back to that. So we're going to double check our configuration file and see that it's pre-configured right with our API key and shared secret. And so we should be good to run npm test. This is the project that I just created with you guys. Same thing with npm. So make sure you're using node v6. Since my default isn't 6, I'm getting a bunch of these errors. But so now if we run npm test, we can see here we have our built-in test is passing again. Same thing as we just went over. So now let's write one new test just to go over how we would do that. So I'm going to come to our documentation page. Just expand this so you can see everything. All right. So I'm on the CyberSource Payments documentation again. This time I navigated to create a credit. This is another endpoint that CyberSource offers. So we are going to take this URL. So this time we're going to hit the credits endpoint, and we handily have a body that's loaded up onto the API Explorer here. And we can see that it should work on this API Explorer, but we want to test it out on our local environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to describe a new test. We'll just do it in the same file for now. So I'm back in the CyberSource Payments test file. And so we're going to describe a new test, CyberSource credits test. So this time we're going to create a credit. And similar to the tests we just ran above, let's set the same timeout. Our API key, we're going to read from our config file. That's going to be the same. Base URI, also the same since we're using CyberSource. Resource path, that's going to be a different endpoint now. So we had the authorizations endpoint. Now we're going to come back to the documentation page, and we're going to take the credits endpoint. So that's going to be our new endpoint that we're going to hit for our second test. So we're going to append our API key on the end of our URI. So that's going to be a query parameter. And then we will use our Visa API client, again, to do XPay token requests. And similarly, we're going to have our base URI that we defined. We're going to have our resource path, query parameters, and then we need our new body. So like we said, we have this handy pre-configured one on the documentation page for the create a credit endpoint. So if we come back, let us define a credits payload. And so this is just going to be some simple JSON with our new payload. So we're going to pass that into the XPay request field here, just as we did above for the payment authorization request. If we come back to the documentation, we can double check that this is also a post method, that this endpoint uses a post. So we'll pass that in. Headers we'll leave blank. And our callback, we will do the same thing. We will just check if our resource was created and do some error handling as well. All right, so we have created our second test. We have our new payload, our credits payload. We've defined our second test here, the credits test. Set a timeout, done all of our configuration and parameter setup. And so I think we're ready to make sure to save it. And let's try again with our brand new test. So now we have two tests in our runner. Oh, and we got an error. I remember what it was. We need to stringify our request body. So once we add that in, let's try one more time. All right, and we have our second test passing. So we just went over the preloaded test on the CyberSource sample code for Node. And then we also wrote a new test with a different endpoint, different body, and also saw that it worked. So we tested that our connection works, our credentials work, and now we have a skeleton for a larger project, right? Whether you're building whatever kind of application you're building, is a really nice way to start off with some simple tests to make sure everything is set up correctly. And once you actually want to make your start making API calls, you have all this nice setup, this Visa API client, and all these nice things to really do all of the authorization and authentication stuff very easily. So everything that we just went over is in the Getting Started guide. Again, so that's a great resource. We have some videos actually about both XPay token and our other authentication scheme, mutual authentication. So I wanted to also go over quickly the setup for mutual authentication, but in the interest of time, we're not going to go through all the tests and stuff. So just because that is our other authentication scheme, and many of our products use mutual SSL authentication, I thought we would quickly go over that stuff. All right, so one more great resource we have. If we come back to the README in any project that we have, I'm going to come to a Visa Direct app and a sample code that I've previously downloaded. If we come to the README for this Visa Direct sample code, we see a manual here, right? So if we come, we can see update the configuration.json in the config folder, and then we have a GitHub link here to refer to. So that is this manual. So I will just navigate over. So we see this is set up for people that are using our sample code. And we have this mutual authentication section here. So mutual authentication, instead of just an API key and a shared secret, we have a user ID, a password, and then we have a certificate and a private key. So there's a couple more steps involved in the mutual authentication scheme. So I just want to make sure that you guys can set that up. So when you are creating an app that has mutual authentication, as I can do here, webinar, we'll try Visa Direct. If I click Visa Direct, we'll see a new Submit a Certificate Signing Request section that pops up that didn't pop up when we created our CyberSource app. So Certificate Signing Request, or CSR for short, is a certificate that we at VDP can either generate for you, or you can submit on your own, depending on how you want to set it up. Generally, it's if you don't have any interest in looking through the minutia of it, generating a CSR is totally valid, and we're happy to do it for you. So if you ask for generate CSR for me, you can also modify the values that are generated as part of the CSR here. And once you click Create Project, the CSR will be generated, and you'll be given a private key. So there's two things, the CSR and a private key will be generated. So you got to make sure to download that private key. It's a one-time download, and if you don't download it, it's lost forever. We don't keep a copy of it, so you got to be careful with that. Store it in a secure place, and I'll just show you how to configure a Visa Direct sample code app. So if we come here, I've already downloaded the sample code, and if we come to the security file, all this has been created. So the sample code comes with this cert.pem preloaded. That was the cert that's generated from the CSR. That's all preloaded, and you can come to your app and download it again if you need it. But you also need your private key. That's this key, get a GUID, and then .pem. That is going to be important for our configuration. So when we're setting it up, you got to put the cert and the private key in the same file. And when we come to our configuration file for this Visa Direct sample code, you'll see your user ID and password are preloaded. And then you also have to give the path to your certificate and to your private key. So based on that, there's a very similar flow to our XPay application and our sample code. If we come in to our Visa Direct test files, you'll see a similarly set up file. We're going to describe a Visa Direct push funds transaction test. Same idea, where we're generating our payload, and then describing the actual test. So here we see our base URI is Visa Direct, resource path is push funds transactions, and now with our Visa API client, we're doing a do mutual auth request call. So now, since we've changed our authentication scheme, you got to make sure to use that other function that's included in the Visa API client. So if we come in to our abstract Visa API client file, we'll see a similar setup to our other sample code that we went over. This time we'll focus on the do mutual auth request function. So similarly, it takes in a path, request body, method type, headers, and a callback. This time our user ID, password, key, and certificate are all loaded from the configuration, and we'll similarly set our headers. When we execute our request, our key will get read from the file, our cert will get read from the file, and you can also pass in that callback that logs the response and executes the callback that we passed in. So I just wanted to go over that quickly with you guys. I'm not going to actually run and create these tests, but I just wanted to show you guys both the XPay token and the mutual auth flows that we have set up for different products. So the way to tell which authentication scheme you need to use, if you have any questions on that, is once you actually create the app, you'll see in your credentials, if I come to an app that we have already, you will see for an XPay token, you'll see an API key and a shared secret in your credentials, and as we saw, you'll see a username and password and some certificates if you have a mutual authentication. And the reason that it's not as simple as which one is because you can mash up different products when you're creating an app. Sometimes you'll need to use both authentication schemes depending on which API you're hitting. So if you're hitting a XPay token endpoint, then you'll need to make sure to call the XPay function on the Visa API client. Versus if you're hitting a mutual authentication endpoint, you need to make sure to keep those straight, right? So that's just a quick summary on our different authentication schemes and how they are set up nicely with the sample code that's built into most of our products on BDP. So I will throw up another question for you guys to answer. While it loads, give me a second. Sorry about that, guys. Cut out for a bit. We wanted to push you another question, and we wanted to know how many of you guys that are online right now are going to the Money 2020 Hackathon this weekend. Myself, Sean, and Ricardo are all going to be there, really excited, so we want to know how many of you guys are going to be there too. So if you want to take a second and respond, we'll check out how many of you guys are going, and then we will wrap up soon. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, we're back. Let's go over the answers. We see that, a good chunk of you guys, 30% of you guys are planning on attending the hackathon. We're really excited to see you guys. A bunch of you guys want to come next year. That's awesome. You should definitely try and check it out. And thanks for everyone else that logged on too. So now we are going to run through really quickly once again some of the changes to the site, because I know some of you guys are having trouble. So let me share my screen again, and Sean will take it away.
Awesome, guys. And again, like we mentioned, we'll be at Money 2020 this weekend, and definitely excited to see the 30% of you guys that'll be there. And hopefully next year we'll see many, many more of you. So just to quickly go over this one more time. Again, this is really exciting, some of the things that we're doing on visadeveloper.com. So again, definitely check us out on your mobile device. The responsive design has definitely been upgraded, so you guys can check that out. Again, you have the API information right at your fingertips there, so just double click through that. The other thing that I think is very, very good here is, again, the solutions page that we have. With 30 plus products and growing on the Visa Developer Center, we want to make it, again, very easy for you guys to find the information that you need without getting lost in the site. So looking for specific information such as issuers, acquirers, merchants, things catering to specific clients, you can select that right here on the home page, or you can go to the Solutions Center where we demonstrate how mashed up APIs actually solve specific use cases. So if I click it, you can pop it open. We have a few examples there already. Enhanced funds transfer experience, enhanced card on file experience, enhanced travel experience, enhanced merchant information. So if you select those, you'll basically find a group of APIs underneath each one of those. We're constantly adding new products and constantly adding new solution sets, so visit back here very often. And with that, I'm going to go over to Artie.
Yeah, so we wanted to open, sorry, we're going to end the screen share really quickly. We wanted to open the floor now. I think we've been gathering some questions for throughout the webinar. So Sean and I are going to take a crack at them, see what we can help you guys out with before the hackathon, or if you guys have questions in general.
Okay. So question one looks like, when would you use CyberSource Payments API versus the Visa Payments Processing API? So that's a good question. The CyberSource Payments API is definitely much more merchant-centered. VPP is more so centered towards issuers. So if you're looking to basically enable, say, the ability to accept payments inside of your digital app across different credit cards, definitely you probably want to check out the CyberSource. VPP right now is still in trials, and we're still developing it, and it should be made available a little bit more publicly starting next year.
Sounds good. Next question.
Let's see. Hi Visa team. I would like to inquire, please, the time frame required in order to submit an application to integrate to Visa Developer and shift from Sandbox to production. Many thanks. So the answer to that question is that it does change. It depends on which product that you're actually going to be using. Some products are very, very simple. We have a very simple onboarding process. Let's take Visa Checkout. Visa Checkout is actually going to be fairly fast. Other products can take maybe 30 days, even up to 60 days for you to actually get integrated. It really depends on what the requirements there are around it, and whether or not your use case being validated actually suits the needs for actually using those specific products. So it could take time, right? So definitely check out the site. In many cases, on some of the pages, we talk about what things to know and things to do, and where that information is missing. Engage with us on the community and definitely shoot an email out to us, and we should be able to respond to you about the specific product if there's a question about it.
And there's also, should be on the left nav of your project, there should be a project promotion tab now where you could check out, and there's a form you could fill out and submit. So you can actually reach out through that form and explain your project and your use case and what you intend to do with your application. And then an admin from our team will actually get back to you quickly with any extra information they need, or if something doesn't fit, or if it works out, then they'll just approve you right along. So that's also a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. Let's see. So this is from Intropay. Hi, Visa team. I would like to inquire, please. This is the same question. All right, let's go to the top here. Actually, let's go down. Let's see one of the old ones. Okay, so this one is a developer question. How can a developer access the NFC on iOS or Android?
So for that, I think you would have to look at Apple's and Android's documentation. So if you want to hook into their hardware stuff, that's an awesome integration that we think Visa APIs are very attuned to integrate with, but we don't support those devices or these that technology per se on people's phones. So that would be a good thing to look up if you want to shoot a question onto the forum though of how to ask if other people have integrated with NFC. I think that'd be a good jumping off point. I'm sure other people on our community have gone through the same setup that you're asking about. So that'd be great. Next.
Okay. Let's scroll up here. So this one says MB Smart SA. Do you have some option for present card, MB contactless, similar like CyberSource?
Card present, contact and contactless.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what you mean by this. When you say contactless and we talk about card present or rather card not present transactions, the first thing that comes to mind is things like VTS and Visa token services, the ability to basically tokenize cards. So hopefully this is answering your question. We do have a service that allows you to enable something like contactless payments. And again, that obviously requires that the issuer themselves have opted into that program with you. But nevertheless, we do have that technology available on the site with VTS.
All right, one more question. Let's find one.
There's an IoT question.
Oh, put his name in the question.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. It's like, okay. Yeah, so this one kind of actually is an interesting one. But then I'll answer this is Michael Aro, I guess, right? IoT Pass. What relevant payment API will be nice for a machine to make payment automatically without human intervention? This kind of goes back to the answer I just gave about Visa token services. It's really tokenization. So when you think about the vast array of the number of devices that will basically be made available and the increase of that, right? How do you tokenize devices? Well, it's going to be something like Visa token services or some other technology of the like, where essentially you can then implement a payment instrument on that device. Would you agree?
Yeah, yep. Sounds like a good use case.
All right, we have time for any more? One more question?
All right.
I'll let you already see something that...
Yeah, we can scroll through a couple.
Yeah.
Sure. We got a question from Mikhail, looks like. Can these webcast source code be posted for the tests you use to be found to look over again? Is there any ways we can post some resources from today? Okay. We will send out a link to you guys with the resources and that extra test I wrote today. That's a good question because yeah, it might be a little hard to follow along. So we definitely want to make these resources available for you guys afterwards.
It'll be available on their hackathon page.
All right, it'll be available on your hackathon page. So look out for that. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and for some great questions as well.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much, and definitely we'll see you at the hackathon for those of you who will be attending. Those of you who will not, definitely take a look at the resources that are made publicly available on the site, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Hey guys, I just took a look through some of the questions. I think we still have people on, so I'm going to try to answer some that are more hackathon related that I don't think Ari and Sean knew the answer to right away. So whether we're going to have a Slack channel available for the hackathon, we're actually creating a support email for all of you at the hackathon where you can email us. So please check the hackathon page, which is on the resources widget for that update. The webcast is going to be shared. The webcast from yesterday is being edited so that we can share it out. So please be on the lookout for that as well on the hackathon page and on the webinar pages that I showed you earlier on the community. You also have that link in the resources widget. For the hackathon, do you know what hardware will be available to us? We have several options for you. We have some Echo shows, we have IoT buttons, we have Muse headbands, we'll have some Fitbits that you can borrow. You'll have to visit us at the booth in order for you to get this. So make sure you come find the Visa developer team on site. Let's see here. Well, what are the most popular VDP APIs? This will help us get more unique ideas and integration. Visa Direct and Visa Checkout are definitely very popular APIs, but I wouldn't limit your hackathon idea based on that. You can get as creative. You can get very creative with popular APIs using use cases that we haven't seen before. So focus on the creativity of the idea. I think that's it. All right, guys. Thanks.